Hello again, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me this Sunday. I'm Fredricka Whitfield. And we began this hour with this breaking news. Ukraine says it carried out large-scale drone attacks on multiple air bases, including some thousands of miles inside Russia. It says Operation Spiderweb caused billions of dollars in damage. A Ukrainian military source said multiple combat planes were destroyed in the attack. Russia has confirmed there was an attack, but is giving few details. Let's get more now on these major developments. With us now is Admiral James Stavridis. He is a CNN senior military analyst and former NATO Supreme Allied Commander. Also, CNN senior political commentator and former Congressman Adm Kinzinger. He's also a former member of the House Armed Services and Foreign Affairs Committee and served in the Air National Guard. Good to see both of you. Thank you so much. Congressman, you first. Do you think this is a game changer or of some other significance that Ukraine could pull this off?
Yeah, this is a huge deal. This is, I would actually say this is right there with when Ukraine had their very successful counteroffensive. Keep in mind, we've recently had, the President of the United States say that Ukraine doesn't hold any cards. This is cards. This is a serious amount of cards, by the way. Potentially taking out a third of Russia's bomber force is what this could potentially be, is a hit like no other. And keep in mind, Ukraine is actually winning this war as a defending country. All you have to do to win is keep defending until the attacker runs out of combat power. At the beginning of the full-scale invasion, Russia occupied 30% of Ukraine. Today, it's 18%. They've lost 1 million men, casualties in that process, and now potentially a third of their bomber force. This is a really big deal, potentially going into negotiations. And keep in mind, up until this point, Russia's been attacking indiscriminately civilian targets in Ukraine all week, all month, and frankly, the entire war.
So, Admiral, what does this say about Ukraine's, is it heightened intelligence gathering, or is it a new directive or strategy?
It's all the above, and I'll add a couple. It is a clever tactic. What they did was put these drones, quadcopter drones, into trucks. They got them deep inside Russia. A way to think about these strikes, this would be like launching from Washington, D.C. and attacking targets in Los Angeles. I mean, Russia's a huge country, largest in the world. These strikes are at distance, exactly as Congressman, and by the way, you left out his most important credential for this conversation. He's an Air Force pilot, so he really understands the air distance equation and how remarkable this is. So, Fred, put together the unmanned technology, the intelligence of the locations, and the military savvy to load it on trucks, get it across this vast country, launch it at scale and at distance. I think it's a remarkable strike. I'm Greek American, so I've got to give you this. It's kind of the Trojan horse. It's these wooden crates that got pushed into the country, and suddenly sprouting forth from it are these warriors destroying all of these planes, none of them human beings. It's really quite a remarkable military feat.
So then, Congressman, clearly Ukraine is likely preparing for some sort of retaliation, but at the same time, what does this kind of successful, attack from their standpoint do to the morale for Ukrainian fighters?
This is huge for Ukrainian morale. This is devastating for Russian morale. Now, keep in mind in this process, we're going to see, so Ukraine is going to see how Russia responds to this. They've seen how Russia does or does not, in this case, does not defend their military bases, and they're going to adjust from that. There likely could be many more attacks like this kind of on the perch, ready to go in Russia. And now all of a sudden, Russia has had to go from defending its air bases and its military stuff, basically, within 500 or 1,000 kilometers of the front line to the entire amount of Russia. And keep in mind, they're already almost out of air defense as it is. They had to move almost all their air defenses to Moscow just to defend their parade. So this is a big deal. And for Americans, it's important to remember this. We have a choice. We can either help Ukraine defend itself, and if we do, we'll have a bit of a say in how Ukraine defends itself. If we don't, Ukraine's got to do what they can do. And again, it's important to keep in mind, every one of these targets today was a legitimate, under the rule of war, legitimate target for Ukraine to strike. What you will see in the Russian response is an attack on schools, on hospitals, on civilian infrastructure, because that's what Russia does. Ukraine fights fair, Russia goes after civilians.
And then now, Admiral, all this taking place, on the eve, give or take a few days of, this meeting that is supposed to be taking place in Turkey between Russia and Ukrainian representatives. How might this either change the dynamic, apply more pressure, or might it mean a complete retreat from even having talks like this, meaning Russia retreating?
I wouldn't be surprised to see the Russians put a freeze on things. On the other hand, more likely they'll try and kind of brazen their way through it and say, we caught all the people who did this. There'll be a bunch of round up the usual suspect operations. Ukraine, by the way, was very careful to point out that everybody involved in this is already back in Ukraine. So anybody you arrest, Russia, is wrong. I believe that, frankly. And then secondly, again, the innovation on display here, I think, is really what you have to focus on. And so I would say the talks probably freeze momentarily, then they'll move forward. Hey, final thought for you as I watch this as a former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO. People ask me a lot, hey, do we really want to take Ukraine into the alliance? When this war is over, this is going to be a country manufacturing 2 million, maybe 3 million drones a year. They'll have the most highly blooded, motivated military force on the continent. Do we want them on Team NATO? Man, I do.
A congressman, as the Admiral was saying, this really is a display of innovation, too, in terms of this strategy. How do you think that will land with President Trump, who, has not been completely supportive of Ukraine, if you want to put it that way, and he has claimed, however, he was disappointed, though, in the behavior of Putin. But how might this potentially influence a more definitive point of view coming from the president?
Well, let me just say, I couldn't have said better than what the Admiral said about the importance of Ukraine and how they would be an asset to NATO. Look, so what does this mean for President Trump? Look, I don't know. He has yet to really attack Putin. I would not be surprised. I would be saddened, but I would not be surprised if he somehow blames Zelensky for the stalling of the negotiations in this case. I hope he doesn't. Because keep in mind, this is the crazy thing. This is a massive attack, right? Again, against legitimate military targets. All week leading up to today, Russia has been sending drones and ballistic missiles into Ukraine after civilian targets, but for some reason, they never get blamed for stalling negotiations. So my hope is the administration and President Trump, finally kind of turns the corner here and at least gets out of Ukraine's way and allows Ukraine and Europe to defend themselves. Of course, I would love to see the United States once again support our allies and go against, not just Russia, by the way. Ukraine is fighting Russia, Iran, China, and North Korea. They're like all enemies of the United States. So it might be really good to support Ukraine at this moment.
Hey, Admiral, I do want to shift gears, talk about another conflict, because we did just learn that Hamas is now saying it is ready for indirect negotiations to reach a truce in Gaza. And it comes a day after the U.S. called out Hamas for essentially rejecting the last U.S. proposal. Are you hopeful to hear this?
I hate to say it this way, but boy, have we seen this movie already. It's been again and again, walk up to the edge. And we ought to remember, yes, there was a 6, I think it turned into 8 to 10 week ceasefire, and about half the hostages were released. So we ought to be hopeful. We ought to do everything we can to encourage getting to the ceasefire. But if you're asking me what are the odds of closing that switch, I think it's 1 in 4 at best. A positive aspect of this moment is that Hamas is really rudderless, would say in the Navy business. Both Sinwar brothers have now been killed. My view, that's a good thing. These are 2 hardened terrorists who are the masterminds of this horrific attack on Israel. So Hamas, I think, kind of feels the walls closing in. Let's hope they will accept this ceasefire. I kind of think this offer on the table for Hamas is last exit before the tunnel, because if they don't take it, I think Israel's just going to go in and smash what's left of the place and effectively occupy it. So Hamas, wake up. Here's, I think, your last best chance to get to a negotiation.
All right, we'll leave it there for now, gentlemen. Admiral James Stavridis, Congressman Adm Kinzinger, great to have you both. Thank you so much.
You bet.